Likutei Sichos, Chelik Yutes, Volume 19, the Sicha for Parshas Savo / Chai Elul. First of all, Chai Elul, Chai is 18, the 18th day in Elul. This is the birthday of the Baal Shemtov, the founder of Chassidus, the Chassidic movement in general, and of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Zalman of Ladi, the founder of Chabad Chassidism. Just a few things to help us flow through the Sicha. Number one, historically we know that from when the Jews entered Israel until they fully settled the land, it took a total of 14 years. As the sages tell us, Sheva Shakavshu v'Sheva Shacholku, the 7 years that it took them to conquer the land and the 7 years it took them to divide it up and settle it. Keep that in mind. Another thing that would help us is to get a little appreciation of a term of Atik. Atik literally means ancient, Atik Yomin. As explained in Kabbalah, we refer to God himself as the Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days. What does this mean? So we know that in general there's a Seder Hishtalshalos, there's a scheme of spheres which evolve one another, and it's like a series of intermediary stages from one attribute to another until the world can manifest itself in the manner that we see it, that we know it. Now, the highest of them is Keser, literally means the crown. It goes above all of them, okay, even above the intellectual spheres. Within Keser, the highest point is called Atik, the ancient one. I mean, we don't really have a good term to describe it. We don't know what it is. It's something ancient, it's something beyond. Now, another point to keep in mind is that in everything, in all these aspects of holiness, and anything that it may be, even in our practically speaking, in our lives, we always have what's called pnimius and chitzonius. Pnimius means the innerness of something. Chitzonius means something more external. Just, it's not a matter of being good or bad. In other words, it's not that pnimius is good, is synonymous with good, and chitzonius is synonymous with bad. It's just a reality that everything has a more inner part and more external part. Just to use as an example, within a person, the more inner part will be perhaps the person's intellect. Okay, you don't know what's going on in a person's mind and what they're thinking unless they express it to you. However, so that's more pnimi, that's more internal, innerness, that is. What happens, for example, however, when somebody has an emotion, that usually is very visible, and it's obvious most times. If a person's happy, if they're sad, if they're depressed, you can see it on them. That's more expressive, so that's more chitzonius. So that's just to use as an example. Just, if you can, please get used to the term so it makes it easier. Pnimius and chitzonius. Again, pnimius means more innerness, chitzonius means more external. Also get used to the term chayus. Chayus means the life of something, the life energy of something. So let's go into the Sicha. We know that Chai Elul marks the birthday of, quote, the two great illuminaries, the Baal Shemtov and the Alter Rebbe. And this special day always coincides in very close proximity to Parshas Ki Savo, the Parsha which we read this week. Now, since all the significant days of the year are hinted and alluded to in one way or another in the Parshas that are read in closest proximity to them, so it's obvious that we need to look in Parshas Ki Savo and find that indication, that hint for Chai Elul, because this is no different. In other words, Chai Elul should be expressed, at least hinted, in Parshas Ki Savo. So, says the Rebbe, we don't have to go too far. Just look at the name of the Parsha. What is the name of the Parsha? Ki Savo, when you come. The idea of coming. Now, what is the idea of coming? And this expresses the whole theme of the Parsha. Come means to settle, to be fully into something. And it's interesting that we know, and this is in reference to all the mitzvahs that Hashem commanded us that are contingent on the Jews, ki savoi el haaretz, when you come to the land. So the sages tell us that whenever the Torah tells us that a mitzvah is contingent on coming to the land, I say the word savoi, coming, it doesn't mean just to enter the land, to walk into the land, but rather it means, like I said, after this 14-year period when they, quote, conquered it and settled it. In other words, the word tavai, the word coming, doesn't mean just to come, but it means to settle, a full coming. And this is the rule always. Whenever the Torah mandates that a mitzvah is contingent on, quote, coming to the land, it means settling. So, in short, coming is synonymous with settling, with being fully into something. Now, if we look at this parsha, look at the first verse, it adds something. It says, not only does it say, V'hoya ki sovei la'aretz, it shall come to be when you enter the land, which means, like we just said, settling the land, but then it even adds, V'yirishta v'yashavta bo. It fully expresses the idea that you will conquer it and you will settle it. In other words, there's an added, so to speak, an added emphasis of this matter of settling more so than the norm. In other words, there's a greater emphasis on the, quote, settling here, the inhabiting here, more so than always. So the Rebbe says to have a better understanding, what does this mean, that coming means to be fully settled? So we actually have an halachic example for it. We know that in certain instances, when a person becomes ritually impure, the Torah mandates that they have to go to mikvah. Now, when you go to mikvah, the law is that you have to be, quote, fully immersed. You have to you have to come into the water, and you have to be fully in the water in order for you to become now ritually pure. You have to be fully submerged. And the Talmud makes a statement, that is a rule, that bia b'miktas, in a partial, quote, coming in partially, lo yishmei bia, is not considered to be coming in. In other words, if you didn't fully come into the water, even if your hair was sticking out of the water and not fully submerged, you didn't come into the water. So we see that the idea of coming means to be fully in, to be totally and absolutely in. And therefore, if even in this case, coming to Israel, if not all Jews fully came into Israel, even if I already came into Israel, the law did not take effect, and that explains why, for the duration of those 14 years, when many of the Jews were already settled in their land, but since there were still some Jews that were not fully settled in the land, or not yet at all settled in the land, therefore it wasn't a full coming into the land, and that explains why the laws did not take effect. And this is where we come to our parsha, that on top of that, in other words, what we just explained, the top of the meaning of coming, which mandates that it means fully coming in, there's another added thing of, quote, conquering it and settling it. And there's another level, so to speak, of settling this. And here is the connection to Elul. In other words, just like we've now established that in the idea of, quote, Savo, coming in, there are two, so to speak, levels. There's the general coming, which means fully coming in, and then there's something even more specific, more elaborate, that's expressed in the words, quote, and you will conquer it and settle it. Likewise, in Elul, there are two aspects. There is the aspect of the Baal Shemtov, the birthday of the Baal Shemtov, the one who revealed the general Hasidism, and then there is the specific Hasidism of Chabad, which is celebrated in the birthday of the Alter Rebbe. What is the difference between these two? I mean, the truth is, it's really one and the same. It's Hasidus. The Alter Rebbe did not create something new. He just continued on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov in a very specific manner. So this will be understood based on the saying of the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe said that the Baal Shem Tov showed us that one must serve Hashem. In other words, in a very general way, he told us how that one has to serve Hashem. And then the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he taught us how to serve Hashem in actuality, meaning how every single Jew could possibly really serve Hashem and implement that idea of the Baal Shem Tov. And these are along the lines of Savo, coming, being a general idea of settling, and how taking it to the next level, as it says in the second half of the verse, V'yirishta v'yashavta bo. To fully understand this, we'll preface with the well-known idea. The idea that explains why is it that the revelation of the teachings of Chassidus is a prerequisite, is a preparation to the coming of Mashiach. What's the connection? In fact, we know this is based on the famous story, a recorded story from the Baal Shem Tov himself. The Baal Shem Tov once went up to heaven, and he went to the chamber of Mashiach, and he asked him, when will the Master finally come and reveal himself? And he answered him, when your well springs will become spread out even in the most outer places in the world, in the most outer levels, that's when I will finally come. And that tells us that through the revelation of Chassidus, that's when Mashiach will come. What is the connection? What exactly, how do the two connect? So we know that in Kabbalah, it says that all revelations, even the greatest of revelations, perhaps even those that we read about in the Torah, the giving of the Torah and so on, are all so great and so deep. However, they're only from the, quote, chitzonius atik. If you recall, we explained what atik was. Chitzonius, the external part of atik. Even though atik in itself inherently is something very inner, but in that itself, as I said, in every single thing, there is a chitzonius and a pnimius, that everything we had till now is still from chitzonius atik. The accomplishment of Bias HaMashiach, of the coming of Mashiach, will be that there will be a revelation of something even far greater, Pnimius Atik, which is the ultimate, so to speak, synonymous with Hashem himself. There'll be a total revelation of godliness itself, purely, the inner, so to speak, aspect of godliness. And based on this, we can say that the accomplishment, so to speak, of Chassidus is that the idea of it introducing this aspect of Pnimius in the service of Hashem. That Chassidus draws the Pnimius of godliness by virtue of revealing the Pnimius in the person and connecting the person in a Pnimiustic way to Hashem himself through Torah and mitzvahs. Now, what is really the idea, the difference between Pnimius and Chitzonius? So an example would be, when you think of Pnimius, something inner, that's the person himself. That's a person for himself. The moment you turn to Chitzonius, or the moment there is Chitzonius, what is Chitzonius? It's the person, as the person interacts, but as the person interacts with something separate from oneself, or something outside of oneself. In other words, the person is relating to something. So it's already not totally and fully the person himself. He's already expressing himself. That in itself is inherently the fact that the person is dealing with and in a sense considering something outside of oneself. So applying these two to avoida, to the performance of Torah mitzvahs, let's understand how this applies. So when a person is doing Torah mitzvahs, for example, bechitzonius, in somewhat of an external matter, what does that mean? Of course you're involved, you're engrossed, you're doing it, you're studying Torah. And inherently when you study Torah, you understand it, there is an inner connection. But the fact that it's still being done in somewhat bechitzonius manner, that means that the person, so to speak, and the matter, in this case the Torah mitzvahs, still at some level remain as two separate entities. They connect, but think of it as connecting two pieces of wood. When you connect two pieces of wood with glue, ultimately they can be a very, very strong bond. But at some point there is a way that you can separate them because they never became one. Now think when you take, for example, metal and iron, and you melt in the metal, you melt it down, and you make something out of it, that becomes one. Okay, you're going to have to cut it apart literally. You have to cut this one thing into two if you want to make two parts of it again. So that is the idea. When a person does Torah mitzvahs bechitzonius, on some level, there's two separate things, the person and the Torah and the mitzvahs. However, when a person does Torah mitzvahs bepnimius, in an inner manner, which Chassidus accomplished this and told us how to do it, then the person and the Torah mitzvahs become one thing. It becomes part of you and you become part of it. You become one. And this is what Chassidus accomplished. That Chassidus reveals, so to speak, the point of life, that life energy that the Yid has in Torah mitzvahs. Now think about it. What is life? How do you describe the life energy? That comes from the soul. How do you explain it? It's something that unifies with the thing that it's giving life to. Think of, for example, a body, a living person. The neshama, the soul of the person, becomes one with the body. Not that it adds to the body. It doesn't, so to speak, create something new in the body. It just, whatever is there, it becomes so one with it, so part and parcel of it, that it gives everything life. Because the fact is, the proof for it is, there is really no difference in size and dimension and in an amount of body parts between, God forbid, a dead person and a living person. It's just that this person's alive and this person's dead. And when a person's alive, you can't point and say, here it's more alive, here it's less alive. The whole person becomes alive. Every aspect of the person becomes alive. It becomes an integral part of the person. Now, every single place where the soul, so to speak, touches, it becomes one. You, in simple English, you're never half alive. You become fully alive. Either you're alive or you're not. In other words, it becomes one thing with you and you're wholly connected to this thing. And here is the accomplishment of Chassidus. Because Chassidus explains that when you do Torah mitzvahs, it shows us how when you do Torah mitzvahs, you can become literally one with it. It reveals the inner life of the Jew and the inner life quality of the Torah mitzvahs and puts them together. Where now you, so to speak, breathe Torah mitzvahs, you become one with it. It's not like you are doing Torah mitzvahs, but you are Torah mitzvahs. This is what Chassidus revealed, that every single Jew has this inner chayis and he can become one with Torah mitzvahs. And this is the explanation. Now we can understand why Chassidus is a prerequisite, is a preparation for the coming of Mashiach. You see, all the Torah mitzvahs that were done up to this point, because there was somewhat of a chitzonius aspect to it. In other words, yes, Jews performed Torah mitzvahs for thousands of years, and they did it with their whole hearts. But there was still, at some level, they were connecting to Torah mitzvahs. But it wasn't, so to speak, inside of them. It didn't become fully one. Chassidus now introduced and advanced the idea that we become actually one, which is now Pnimius, and what will be the accomplishment of Mashiach? In other words, what was missing that Mashiach has to come? If there's nothing missing, why would he come? In other words, what is he coming to add? He is coming to add. He's adding the Pnimius aspect, which is telling us even the revelations of Mount Sinai was only Chitzonius Atik. Right? And he's going to come to introduce, to reveal to us the Pnimius Atik. So we have to now become into that mode of Pnimius, that it becomes that fire, so to speak, that life in us, within us. So, now, as we said, that just like the soul was the example of the pnimius, of the chayis that goes in and makes the thing alive, it becomes one with the thing. But now if we look at it a little closer and we break it down, we will appreciate that even within that, there's also two aspects, so to speak. There's two depths. In other words, if we go in more detail, we'll see that there are two levels. You have the general chayis, the general life energy that comes from the soul, that gives life to the entire body, right? But still, albeit on some level, it's somewhat superficial. Why? Because it's very, very close. It's very general to the entire body. And it encompasses the entire body equally. In other words, it's to nobody specific. No part of the body gets it specifically more than the other. And that's why, as far as life is concerned, being alive or not being versus not being alive, chas v'shalom, there is no difference in the amount of life, in the type of life, so to speak, between the head, the brain, the most important part of the body, and the foot or the toes. They're both alive. They're both equally alive. However, there's another aspect to the soul, if you want to be more specific, to the life energy that becomes very focused and specific for that body part. And that's why you cannot write with your nose, you write with your hand, because the hand gets a specific chayis that gives the talents not only life, but that specific life for the hand. It becomes very, very focused, very specific. And the brain has the chayis that the brain has to have. The heart has the chayis that the life energy that the heart has to have. And perhaps, says the Rebbe, now we can appreciate that although in general Chassidus brings that life, inner life out, the pnimius, but now we can appreciate the difference, the fine difference between the general Chassidus, which was revealed by the Baal Shemtov, and Chassidus Chabad, which was revealed by the Alter Rebbe. You see, the Baal Shemtov revealed a general chayis in Torah mitzvahs, how a yid can become so submerged in Torah mitzvahs that he becomes one with it, he becomes unified with it. However, the Alter Rebbe gave us much deeper focus, more specific focus, and he focused in, zoomed in, so to speak, on each and every detail, and showed the chayis that there is in each and every detail, that connectivity that a Jew can have to each and every detail, each and every aspect. And in fact, we see it in the name of this Chassidus, in other words, in the in the focus of the Chassidus, which is Chabad. Chabad is Chochmah bin Adas, that's intellect. The whole idea of intellect is that you actually go into each and every single aspect, even each and every single detail, in order to fully understand it, in order to fully become submerged in it. Thus, you can piece things together and really get a true appreciation of something. And that explains the difference between the two. Now, it would seem, based on what we just said, that the, quote, focused or detailed chayas is less than. Why? Because it's limited to a certain a part or a certain specific aspect, just like in the body, right? The chayas that's in the hand is very specific for the hand. So the head doesn't have it. The foot doesn't have it. So it seems to be more limited. And if that's the case, it could be less than. But we're actually touting here the idea that pnimius is greater than chitzonius. So how do we explain it? The answer is, says the Rebbe, that the truth is that there's a great gain, there's a great advantage in the specific chayas. You see, in that detailed one, in the pnimius one. Why? Because the general chayas, although it's there, like we said, it's evident and obvious when a person's alive that they're alive. And that the head's alive, the foot's alive, everything's equally alive. But it's somewhat superficial. You don't see a direct effect of that life, of that soul, affecting that specific, so to speak, that specific body part, that specific aspect in its full entirety. It could be alive. And remember, God forbid, when someone's in a coma, they're still alive. They're not functioning, right? So you see like the life almost seems to be dormant. When you see, however, this specific expression in each and every body part, their body part, whatever is exclusive for that body part, whatever respective for that aspect of the body, and in this case, in Chassidus or Torah mitzvahs, this is where you see a true and absolute expression of that general chayas that there is. And that is what the Alter Rebbe accomplished, so to speak, in the general revelation of Chassidus. He brought it that he gave us a deeper chayas in the detailed aspects of things, and this enhanced the general revelation of the chayas which was revealed by the Baal Shemtov. And now we understand the connection. V'hoya ki savoi. Savoi means to come. This is a general settling. This is a general pnimius, coming and really connecting to something. This is synonymous with Chassidus HaKlolis, the general Chassidus, which was revealed by the Baal Shem Tov. But the extra aspect of, quote, settlement, of connectivity, of a deeper previous connection, which is expressed in the further words in the pasuk, in the verse, v'yarashta v'yashavta ba, that there's an added settlement. This is synonymous, and this is parallel to the revelation that was accomplished by the Alter Rebbe. Thus, we have an absolute connection between the first verse in this pasuk, and this verse carries the name of the parsha, Kisavoi, to the two aspects of the commemoration that we have on Chai Elul, namely the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov and the birthday of the Alter Rebbe.